Good afternoon and welcome to the February 5th meeting of the DEIJ Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee. We have first on our agenda approval of the January 16th minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Natalia. Mariah, are you seconding? Mariah seconding. Okay. Natalia, your vote?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Okay, and I also vote yes. Second on our agenda today is, sorry, was that?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Second on our agenda today was an overview of the Coalition for Anti-Racist Education. I believe Colin, you were here for that.
That's correct.
Thank you for coming.
I'm also sharing time, I believe, with Erica Anderson.
Oh, apologies. I just said I would do something and I haven't yet. I'm going to read the attendees at the moment that we have at the beginning of the meeting. Arthur Conquest, Carolyn Thal, Connie Clausen, and if I'm mispronouncing names, my apologies. Faiza Khan, Iris Alpert, Leora Faber, Noah Lieberman Isakov, Ruth Kaplan, and Jana Schechterman. Apologies for interrupting, Colin.
Not at all. Hi, everybody. I'm Colin Stokes. I'm a parent of a BHS grad and a first year at BHS. We both went through Pierce. I'm also on town meeting from Precinct 7. And I'm here just to introduce you to CARE, which is the Coalition for Anti-Racism in Education, alongside Erica. And I'm gonna, my main point is to share our enthusiasm for partnering with this subcommittee and with everyone else who values equity. I'll give a little bit of history and some observations and then pass it to Erica for some specifics. Our group has evolved from a program started by Khalees Warnham when she served as Brookline's first equity director. She invited 2 representatives from each school to meet with her monthly to learn and discuss and bring ideas back to our communities. And then Janae continued to coordinate a version of that group when she took on the role. And then when she stepped down last summer, we decided to organize ourselves, and we now operate independently so that we don't take time away and energy away from the district leadership. We are continuing to recruit people from the equity groups that evolve and grow organically from every school. We currently have about half of the schools represented when we meet each month. I see our mandate as essentially figuring out what caregivers can uniquely do to support racial justice in our schools and then try to organize around those things. A few patterns that I've noticed, which I know will ring true for you. Every school is really different, and even those environments can change frequently throughout the year. And of course, they're experienced differently by different people. So it's very hard to sort of find one solution that works for everyone. And for that reason, relationships across difference can actually be a really important tool for problem solving together. So, and because of the way our world is segregated and a variety of other reasons, it takes work and energy to form those relationships, and that's something that caregivers can do pretty well. And also that it is, there's a lot of hunger for transparency and clear policies and processes when there are problems to solve. And parents can help to make any existing policies and practices visible, as well as to advocate for ones that would be supportive. I'm excited that so many of my Pierce friends are still part of the group, but I'm really happy to have met other parents with skills and insights who are taking us forward. And one of them is Erica Anderson, who I will pass it over to next.
Thanks, Colin, and thank you to everybody. Thanks to everybody for letting us speak today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Erica Anderson. I'm the parent of 2 6th graders at Ruffin Ridley and a 9th grader at the high school. I came to this work, like so many things that we as parents do, because my child led me here. When my oldest daughter was in the 4th grade, she decided to apply to be part of a committee to change the name of her school from Devotion to Ruffin Ridley. That led me to being involved in Ruffin Ridley's Equity Parent Action Coalition and our first initiative, which is now known as the Brookline Readers and Leaders. Every week, we explore diverse topics through stories and discussion, and we work to create an inclusive community and equip students to make positive change, in part by learning how to have courageous conversations and celebrating what makes us unique and diverse as a community. It's through the work that our Equity PAC at Ruffin Ridley is doing and CARES is doing that we begin to see where this type of community, this diverse community, and these discussions already exist in our district, where they need to be strengthened and where they still need to be built. When that community breaks down, or when that community hasn't been built in the first place, everybody in our community is affected. Teachers, administration, classrooms, other grades. It's not just the children and the teachers in the classroom where there might have been something specific that happened. It affects our entire community. And I think we all saw this happen very focused last fall when a world crisis hit so close to home. Challenges like that remind us that equity affects everybody. And that's why equity has to involve everybody. Equity isn't just one part of a grade level's curriculum. It's not just a workshop or a training or a book that we read or one section in our libraries. It isn't a bucket to fill or a district administrator's job or a principal or that one certain teacher who's really good at talking about it, or even a parent group that has equity in its name. Every single one of those things that I just mentioned are really, really good. And they're all things that are really important. But all of those things are separate. And equity needs to be something that's foundational throughout our entire system for Brookline's education to truly be excellent for every student and for every family. And that's going to require some structural change. And that's the things that we are trying to work on at CARES and in each of our individual schools. We see that starting with 2 concrete things that I think have been talked about in some of the other meetings that have happened. But I want to put some support behind them by the parents. First is an equity audit. To understand how to make things equitable across each of our schools in the district, we need to understand what is happening in each of those schools. And an audit is one of the things that can accomplish those things. We saw recently that there was an audit relating to curriculum because people didn't think that the middle schools, or it was observed that the middle schools were not having the same amount of educational time in each of our classes. That's the same type of thing we have to have with an equity audit to see what type of equitable opportunities, whether the opportunities are the same for each of our schools. So an equity audit is the first concrete step. The second concrete step is having 2 trained equity individuals at each school. One would be K through 5 and one would be for 6 through 8. These individuals would provide a path to resolution for issues that arise and for specific equity learning and training that doesn't currently exist in our schools. And this is really important, and I want to talk about for a few reasons why. Having this trained equity lead at each of our schools, 2, really, one for middle school, one for the lower grades, would remove the burden from the central office, which isn't the appropriate place to solve every single issue that comes up with every individual school. It would also create visibility. Staff and caregivers would know at our schools where to go. And so that, again, would help take that burden off of our administrators at central office. It would also demonstrate that equity is part of our system at PSB. It's not an addendum or a bucket to fill. It demonstrates that equity is being prioritized as one of our values at PSB by dedicating resources to pay these individuals, because how we spend our money demonstrates what we value. It also unifies equity work in each of the schools across the district, because these people would work together as a team and would ultimately report to the central office. And it would still allow each of the individuals to know their unique communities, their unique school, and be able to address each of the unique issues that would come up in each school. It also integrates the equity work into the teaching and the learning at each school, so it becomes part of the system of our education. And when we integrate equity into our educational structure through steps like this, then we as a district move beyond good intentions and hoping for an equitable system to actually implementing one. It enables us to reach the big goals that we've talked about and that we've put into the strategic plan. And we demonstrate that when we have equity in our schools, equity means excellence. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica and Colin. Any questions on what the coalition does, who they are? Mariah?
Thanks. I might have missed it at the beginning because I had kid noises in the background that were distracting. But did you say how many members you actually have right now?
We did not say. You didn't miss it.
Okay.
But let me see if I can get you a good number.
Or just like how many schools are represented? Did you say that? I heard you say it wasn't just Pierce, but I didn't quite catch if
Right.
it was other
Yes,
schools. And I'm just trying to understand what CARES is as a body, like who is in this group and being represented, because I don't think I know that. I've seen obviously some of the different work that's being done by the group, but I don't know what it represents or who you are here representing.
the group that you've been hearing from is a sort of leadership group of, I'd say, about 10 people representing half of the schools in the district. As we, and the sort of listserv that we reach out to, which includes representatives from more of the schools, goes up to about 100 at this point.
Got it. Okay.
Just
And do you,
following up on, sorry, go ahead, Mariah.
sorry, just do you like meet like to plan, or how
Yes,
do you
we-
all organize, I guess is my question.
Yeah. Well, we've been meeting monthly this school year with a whole lot of emails in between.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any PSB representation? Like, does Claire go to those meetings? I heard you say that you were somewhat organized and now you've branched off on your own, but I didn't know if that meant there's no PSB participation at that, or there is, but you're taking the initiative to run the meetings.
We have invited Claire and Christina to a meeting when they began, so that we could meet them and hear about what they were after. But we don't we don't have administration representation during our meetings normally.
Okay, I have another question about some of the recommendations, but I will hold that. I don't know if there's other questions you wanted to ask first, Val. I'm taking up a lot of your time.
Well, I just had a question, actually follow up to what Mariah asked. You said at about half of the K-8s. So does that mean that you're looking for leadership in the other half? And if so, is a public recorded meeting, which schools are you looking for leadership in?
Oh, what a great question. I'll get you an answer to that as well as I look at the list we have.
I think the email list, we have almost all the schools represented, but for regular attendance this year, it hasn't been. And Colin, tell me if you have the email list in front of you. I think we're missing Baker. Hayes.
Correct.
Lawrence.
And Lawrence, yeah.
I'm going around the table in my head.
Exactly.
And did you say BHS was represented or was not?
There's
Hayes is not currently represented.
Okay,
No, did you ask BHS?
yes.
Oh, BHS
Yeah.
is represented.
There's a number of us who are,
Okay.
who double up. And then there are some who just have high schoolers now too.
Okay, so Hayes, Lawrence, and Baker. Okay. Any other, Mariah, you said you had another question. I don't see it. Oh, sorry, Steven's hand is up. Go ahead, Steven.
Okay. Hi, Colin. Hi, Erica. It's nice to see you both. I was the informal liaison from the school committee when Janae ran CARE last year. I actually wasn't aware that CARE was running apart from OEE this year, which sounds great to me. It sounds great that it's become an autonomous organization. I'm sorry for missing the first few minutes of your presentation. Can you say what the mandate is of CARE now that it's become something separate from the administration? If you said that, I had missed it. I'm sorry.
Well, I had put it in my own words, but I probably should actually read a formal mission statement. In my mind, the goal is the approach that we're using is what are ways that caregivers uniquely can drive equity and specifically anti-racism in the schools. And so sometimes that involves organizing and advocacy, which is what you'll see mostly from where you sit, but it also involves supporting each other as we organize at our own schools, put on events, educate each other, build relationships. So it's a broad set of goals.
Okay, so when I was going to some care meetings last year, it seemed very much like a clearinghouse for school-based bodies to come together and share their practices, look to scale up successful practices, look to get and share ideas. Is that kind of what you're talking about still, or is this more of a separate campaign to do more district level organizing separately from what's going on at the schools?
I think the first serves the second.
But maybe separate from the second. I'm just wondering if you're looking to achieve the second through school level coordination, or if you're looking to take something separate from school level activities to achieve that goal.
I'm not sure what else we want to achieve.
I think another option could be to come up with campaign ideas and then to disseminate those ideas and try to coordinate their implementation through school level bodies and other kinds of bodies, rather than to act as a convening mechanism for what exists currently at schools.
I don't think I see why that's a either or.
Okay. Thanks,
Feel free to jump in with your thoughts.
Natalie and then Mariah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about, I like the idea of sort of having a responsible, this decentralized model that you were talking a little bit about. And I wanted to understand, is your recommendation sort of at what level of staff member, counselor, like where would that be? And would it be in addition to somebody's, like, I'm trying to think both from a financial perspective, what it would mean, but also what authority level. Like in the past, I've sort of said, I'd imagine someone at the vice principal level should have responsibility for equity, but it sounds like you're envisioning it sort of different. So I'd like a little bit more details of what that recommendation is.
Yeah, I think that would depend on the school, because I think it would depend on, it would have to be someone who, maybe this sounds too obvious, but someone who is really committed and interested in the type of work. So I don't think it would necessarily have to be somebody that's at, an administrative level necessarily. And maybe that wouldn't be necessarily the right fit, because this person would be working very closely with teachers, and not that admin can't work closely with teachers, but I think sometimes, someone who's coming from a teacher role and has worked in the classroom, because I think, we have had conversations with Claire. So Claire, jump in here and say anything, or correct me if I say anything that's off base. Because this was something we had actually talked about as parents, and then we were talking with Claire, and it was interesting how we were all pretty much on the same page. But that it would be, like we said, serve in a role so that parents and teachers, when there are issues that need to be addressed, this person could do that. But then it would also be in sort of a training function also. So it would be someone who could go into classrooms and observe and, talk with teachers about how teaching is being done, so it can be done in a more equitable way. And that might address specific things in a curriculum. It might just address how things are being handled in a classroom. And that might be, when I say handled, that might be a disciplinary issue. It might just be, the way a topic is handled in a classroom, or, how a student addresses another student in a classroom. It could be a variety of things. So it doesn't necessarily, it would not have to be an admin level. Like it wouldn't have to be that high of a level by any means.
Thank you, Mariah, and then Stephen, if your hand is still up. Oh, okay. So Mariah.
Thanks. So I'm gonna keep asking about the the recommendations that were made. Can you clarify, and maybe this is for a question for you, Claire, but I'll throw it out to everyone and the right person can answer this. To what extent are the things that you both, or that you, Erica, said were the two big areas, were they coordinated with the Office of Educational Equity, or were those sort of, you heard what OEE was working on and you wanted to endorse them? Or what's the relationship between the two things you just named and what we've heard from OEE?
I think the most interesting thing that happened was that both of them were things that we had talked about separately before we had meetings with Claire and Christy, and they were slightly different. But then when we had meetings with them and we talked to them about what are the things that you're working on and our priorities from you, we heard the same things from them. So I think what really stuck out to us as parents, and Colin, jump in here too, if you want to add anything, of course, was that those of us who have been looking at this, and Colin, I think, has been at this much longer than I have, but those of us who have at least been looking at, have been working on this for a number of years, are seeing some of the same issues and starting to see paths to address those issues maybe in the same way. And they differed a little bit, especially when we're talking about like having, having, I don't know if you want to call them, these trained equity individuals in the schools. When we were actually talking, when Claire came into the meeting and we got to talking about this, we were saying, oh, this is actually something we have been, talking about. How could we have someone in the school? The exact, details of what that would look like differed a little bit from what we had been kind of tossing around and brainstorming in the CARES meetings from some of the things that Claire had been talking about. But the concept and the role that person would play was basically the same. Like we had not, I'll say that Claire's idea was to have a K-5, 6 through 8, which makes total sense to me once she explained it. There's middle school's a lot different than the younger grades. And a person skilled in the middle school area, would have probably different skills than in the younger grades. So that made sense, but we had never, drilled down quite that far when we were talking in CARES. And the audit was something we had been talking about it, that's something that was really valuable hearing from other schools, like Ruff and Ridley, we have a GSA. Lincoln has a GSA. Other schools don't have a GSA. And that, to me, was real news to me. I thought everybody had a GSA. So that was something that we got to talking about. And then we started talking about other things like, what things do certain schools have to offer to kids in, kind of under that umbrella of DEIB, and what things do schools not have, which I would put under loosely under that category of what would you find that out in an audit? And if you are an LGBTQ child, a student at a school, and your school doesn't have a GSA, that is not an equitable situation. Because if that child went to a different school because they lived down the block and they were at a different school, they would have that support system. And that's not the way our school should be. But you don't know those things. And parents and families don't necessarily know those things until we have, and that's just, one example. So we had already been talking about those things. And then Christy was at one of the meetings and was talking about, we think it would be really valuable to have an audit so that we can make sure that, that's just one example, but that all of the, that there's equitable, just that there is a full balance of equity in all of our schools. And that's something, like I said, the middle school curriculum was one example. I thought, we're doing this in other areas. Makes sense to do it in other areas too.
Can
So I
ask
hope that answers the question. That was kind of long.
Yeah, it does, but I guess I'm maybe a little bit more confused now, and maybe Claire, you can answer this. Is the job, so to speak, in the schools as described what you were envisioning for the $44,000 in stipends? Because the job as described sounds significantly larger than what a small amount of a stipend could provide in each school. I'm just trying to cross-reference all the different inputs that we're getting.
Okay, so I guess I'll just start off saying, and when I had the opportunity to be introduced to CARES through Janae before she left in July, I understood what their role was, and this was a parent group that had initially been led by Dr. Warnham, and then Janae took on that role. But they were becoming an entity all of their own, but still with collaboration with OEE. I had expressed that early on that my hope was to really try to build capacity throughout the district, given that at that time I was an office of one, knowing that we had a position out there, but we didn't have Christy at that time, that we were looking to find a way, what kind of structures could we put in place that would really kind of help build capacity throughout the district. And my thought was that, having equity leads, we'd be able to do that. Given that we have a K-8 model, having equity leads, 2 in each K-8, so that we have someone who's specifically focused on K-5, and then someone who's focused on 6-8, specifically because if we had the big wish that we could do anything, we would have equity coaches. And equity coaches, you might be able to have someone who really has a skill set who's K-8. And so we would have one equity coach. But given that we're doing an equity lead model, you're talking, these are going to be people who have classrooms. So these are classroom teachers who are taking on additional responsibility. In the ask, we are not looking for a 0.2 release. So this is something that will be added on to their caseload. There will be times I'm anticipating throughout the year that we would be able to have some occasional release where we'd have to get coverage through substitutes. But the equity leads that we have for K-5 and 6-8 would be focusing just on that particular curriculum and the needs of those particular teachers and those particular students. And this is an opportunity for them to have time with staff after school during collaborative time, as well as potentially doing some instructional rounds several times throughout the year in collaboration with the OEE office, as well as doing the professional development after school. So that's the big picture. It's a lot to take on. A stipend of $2,000 may seem like a lot, but it's actually not a whole lot for some of the work that they're going to do. Much of the work that they'll do starting this year and next year will be professional development and really starting to work the model to see how it works. Again, if I had the big wish list of what I could do, we'd have equity coaches and have equity leads, and they'd be working in collaboration. We're expecting these equity leads to work in conjunction with the building leaders to think about what are the needs of the individual schools that they need, and thinking again, K-5 and then 6-8, what does that look like?
Can I just say one thing, which is I'm not worried that it's too much money. I don't think it's anywhere near enough money for what we're talking about. And
I'm so glad you said that, because
yeah, I'm worried because I don't think it's I don't think anyone will want to sign up for the job given the amount of work that actually it resembles, unless it's a passion project. But even passion projects, as we know, aren't sustainable either. So
Okay.
as we're trying to make things systemic and function, I guess I worry about hinging them on that, and I will stop talking now.
Stephen?
Thanks, Val. Just 2 more quick comments. First one, I just want to say thanks to Colin and Erica for CARE's inputs on these 2 points, because I know we've talked about them a good deal in this subcommittee and also a bit in the main committee. So it's really helpful to get your input, for me, especially on educational equity governance strategies, because I know, I think the topic, we could really use expert opinions on it. We know that the previous model of just putting 2 people in a central office is not a recipe for success. So I've really been interested, Claire, in your proposal of decentralizing it somewhat. And I have Mariah's same reservation that having a small stipend for that decentralized model may also be a recipe for burnout. So it's good to hear CARE's enthusiasm for a decentralized model as a vote of support for it. But I would just say I would be really keen to see a draft scope of work for that position, so I have a clearer understanding of the role and responsibility for these school leads, so I could have a bit more confidence in what these school-based positions would be responsible for doing. And maybe that would help temper expectations also, since they are only $2,000 annual stipends to incentivize work.
I'd be happy to share it with you.
That would be great. Thank you. That's
You're
great
welcome.
that it already exists. And I don't want to belabor this other point, since I think I already spoke enough on it previously. I continue to be concerned about the equity audit for reasons I raised last time. I just want to ask the CARE representatives, when we had talked about this, I remember last year on CARE, about partnering with a research organization to develop a research agenda around educational equity, particularly around racial educational equity. And I remember it being shot down in favor of a more action-focused agenda. So I guess my question isn't so much what changed, but what is an equity audit consist of in your mind that you're strongly supportive of it? Because I guess I'm still struggling to see a scope that justifies the budget line item that's being proposed. So I'm curious to know what the education audits concretely would look like to you that you would support. Or what would be some of the outputs or outcomes of an equity audit that you would promote?
For me, what we have a lot of is outcomes. We frequently publish the things, you know, that illustrate disparities that exist at the student level. What I'd love to understand, and what I think would help guide policy in a way that nothing, and decision making in a way that nothing else could, is moving one step upstream from that and seeing where are the disparities in investment, in programming, in emphasis, so that perhaps we can identify some of the most effective levers to change the disparities. And if that makes sense.
So what would be a sample research question, Colin, for an equity audit?
Well,
I think would be productive.
Something about the time. This isn't my area of expertise, but if it could be identified that there is time or money being spent that doesn't seem to correlate to the importance of something, that could be reallocated to something else, right? Or that students that are being benefiting from certain programs can, you know, are consistently, you know, given a set of opportunities, while another set of students is clearly not. That might be, you know, that might only raise more questions, but it also might help us see, okay, that's something that really should be changed, and we can organize around it.
Thanks.
David and then Mariah.
I have a couple questions. So could you go into a little more detail about what you mean by equity governance?
I think that was Stephen's
I think that was me.
expression, which I loved, but I would love to hear what Stephen means.
I can
by
say
it.
what I meant by it. I just meant
Okay.
the means by which a district plans to effectuate its equity activities. So I just meant, how are we going to govern all of the equity work we mean to accomplish as a education district, or as a district that does education?
I see. And that also gets into your structural question about decentralizing somewhat.
Yeah. Are we going to
Okay.
do it from a central office of 2 people? Or are we going to do it from a central office and then a bunch of representatives at school, or some other method, or what?
All right. Another question I have around curriculum and professional development. Do you have specific curricula and professional development trainings in mind?
Is that for me, David?
Yes.
Yes, I do. I'm sorry. I didn't know if it was for me. Yes, we already have some things that are in play. So we do have the application set to be posted. I believe it's been sent over to Susan's office. We're waiting to post it for our equity leads to get hopefully selected this year and to have their first training that would take place, which would be Zaretta Hammond's culturally responsive teaching in the brain. So that'll be a 10-hour course that they would do this year. And then next year, we'll be leading into some of our ideas training and some additional PD. So that's the beginning structure of it.
All right. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Can I jump in here for a second on answering, go back to Stephen's question on the, what would be some of the questions, and this goes back, and I'm sorry if I answer these pretty simplistically. I'm not an educator, I'm just a lawyer. So I do answer questions in a simplistic way. But one thing that I think would be useful is looking at curriculum and an equity audit, because I know that I think it's at the 5th grade level that students are supposed to start learning about, pilgrims and settling of the United States in this particular part of the country from a standpoint that's not entirely white centric. And they're supposed to start learning about it from the, more of the Wampanoag perspective and from the Native and Indigenous people, how that, the effect on the Indigenous people and from that perspective. And I know that I have twins in the 6th grade, and when they were 5th graders, so I get to see this right up close. One teacher did an excellent job of that. One teacher, not so much. And that's 2 different teachers in one school. So that would be one thing that an equity audit could do, is look across, 5th grade curriculum. If this is the curriculum that we're supposed to be teaching our children, are they learning it? Are they actually learning that from, learning it from an Indigenous perspective, learning the Indigenous population and how, when the Pilgrims came and all of that from that perspective, or are they just learning it kind of the old school, traditional, way that I learned it? And how is that happening from teacher to teacher, from school to school? And so there's a lot of curriculum questions I think that can be asked too. And that's just one example that I can give because it's one that's close to me in the last year.
So then I have a follow-up for Claire on that, Erica, which is what you're proposing in the equity audit something that would cover 2 teachers teaching what is the approved curriculum differently, or one not teaching it? Is that the level of detail that you would get to in this analysis?
I think in some respects, yes. I think that's something that we would determine with the consultant that we would be hiring, how deep, the depth and breadth of the equity audit in regards to the curricular pieces, as well as the structural pieces that we'd be looking at. But that potentially could be part of it, yes.
So you'd be in every teacher's classroom looking at this?
Every grade level, yes.
Okay, Mariah?
But I guess I'm going to follow up on that. And this was sort of what my question is. We had a scope presented to us at our last DEIJ meeting. And didn't you present a sample of what you thought, Claire, and maybe it was you and Christina presented what was going to go into the equity audit? Did it include, because it's not just grade level, I mean, it's classroom level curriculum.
It is, yes. So what we gave is what we anticipate an overview. We were trying to present an overview of what you would get from an equity audit. So yes. Now, as we sit down with the consultants, if there were more that we wanted to get, we would go deeper into a granular level. But yes, so those are the things we will be looking at.
But I guess I'm concerned because there's only $1 amount we have. So going into a much deeper level, are we going to be able to get that kind of material all within that same budget? I mean, that would be an expansion of scope possibly, because that's a lot of extra work compared to sort of systemic or systems level things. So I'm a little bit not clear on that right now. The other thing I'm also still focused on is, I think at the beginning of the strategic planning session, I'm not sure if it was you or Jody or Linus or who presented it, because I only went to one session, I can't remember. But there was essentially a laundry list of things we know about PSB already and inequity that was presented. And given what we know about inequity already, I'm still trying to understand how the audit expands on fundamental large issues we already know we have, as opposed to possibly providing additional details to them. But if we know, for example, that our curriculum, that students are disproportionately put into special education, students are disproportionately tracked into different things, we have some of this. We know, as Erica just said, or I think I heard, just to repeat one thing, not all the schools have GSAs is one example. So if we know some of these things, do we need to study them again, or can we, now that we've voted the strategic plan, turn towards action?
I think it's a combination. I think we know some of those things. I mean, as we mentioned at the last meeting, that there's been several curricular reviews done. They're not comprehensive. They weren't all the way through all the grades, but also I think it's about getting to the why. I'm hoping that through the equity audit, we'll really get to the why. I think Colin talked about also the investment. Where are we investing our dollars? I think we're not just looking at just curricular. I think we're looking at a combination of the curriculum itself, but also looking at practice, looking at teacher practice, also looking at all of our systems and structures across the district. I too I lost you. I'm so sorry. Oh, there you are, Mariah.
I'm here.
I lost you. You moved the spot. I think what's challenging in that, and I do have concern just in regards to the initial dollar amount. We went with a very safe amount in our preliminary talks with two of the consultants. I do get concerned that, the prices do change, but I think this is something that we can stay within if we decide to move forward with it. But it's not that I don't hear your concerns. I think these are some of the concerns that I have as well, but I think we can stay within that number.
David?
Yes, I'm just wondering if you could be a bit specific about the lenses for equity you're using here. So is this primarily focused around race? Is it around achievement gap? Does it incorporate religion, disability status? How are you looking at equity here?
All metrics would be looked at. So it's not just focused on race. I do think some of the messaging that has come through has been understanding. I think oftentimes when we think about equity and equity audits, well, we tend to look at our, performance data, which oftentimes is focused in on our Black and brown students and around race. So not that we won't be looking at that, we will, but we will be looking at all metrics across the board.
Anything else, David?
No, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Colin, Erica, Claire, for joining for this item.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the
We're moving,
invitation.
moving on to public comment. I believe we have one person signed up for public comment, Leora Faber.
Can I just, before we go away from CARES, if
yep.
Colin and Erica have any, like if there's any information that maybe they want to share later on that does give some more overview or anything, I'd love to see it too. If you already have it, like already at your fingertips or created, I know I would find it beneficial. Thank you.
That would be
Thanks
really
for
helpful
coming.
if you did. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Okay. Good evening. Betsy, you can unmute yourself and then your 3 minutes will begin.
Thank you. So my name is Leora Faber. I'm a parent of a sophomore at BHS, and I'm commenting today on the issue of apparently that the process has been stalled looking in to a policy on hate speech and anti-Semitism in particular. I'm very concerned that it's being looked at as a framework of issues since October 7th, and not the fact that Jews have been historically a group that has faced hatred from both ends of the political spectrum. And I just think the district really needs to focus on coming up with hate speech policies and how to address it. Also, for any other group, I just want, I don't want any students from Islamic, Muslim, or Arab backgrounds to face these issues. But I just think that the district needs to, excuse me, I'm not used to public speaking. So I just want to highlight the critical work that the district needs to do to value the work of anti-Semitism and bias towards Jews in the same way as all racial, cultural, ethnic, socioeconomic, gender and sexual orientation, and disability work, so that all students in the district will be in a culture of equity and inclusion, including Jewish students. Thank you.
Thank you. Concludes our public comment. David, do you have your hand up? Is that a new hand? It's an old hand of David's. Okay. Next on our agenda is an update from Susan on the metrics, or maybe Susan and Claire on the metrics that will be used for evaluating retention and recruitment of our staff. Here I am. Okay. Hi, Susan.
Hi. Well, thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm equally as interested in this topic as you are. And it's my hope that I'll get better insight into some of what you're hoping to learn, so that as I, redesign our processes, I can fold into the process ways to gather the data that you're hoping that we can report out on. I can certainly share with you some of the things that will be added to our process that will help, including exit interviews, which we currently do not do now, as well as after folks are hired, follow up with by our employee engagement specialist to see how staff members are experiencing their first, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, so that we can start to gather information about the kind of retention programming that would be beneficial to our employees. So those are some of the things that, we have, kind of on our list of things that we're going to be doing in places where we could gather data. I know that in our hiring process, after an employee is hired, we have an information sheet that they fill out that asks some of the demographical questions. Of course, it's completely voluntary. They can select that they are not comfortable sharing that information, whether it's their gender identity or their racial background. So, but those are two things that we have built into the information sheet after a person's hired. So those are some concrete ways that we can gather the information. I'm not entirely clear what you're hoping for us to report back on, but certainly
Sure.
I'm
I
happy.
can
Doc-
maybe, I can maybe step back and share. We passed a policy a year and a half ago, maybe longer.
Mhm.
Longer, I think, and Andy is now on camera, he can probably speak to it, on hiring and retention of staff of color. We got our first report. It is to come to this committee in October and then to full school committee in December annually. We got those reports in 2022 from Janae. We understand that the data wasn't perfect. And then when we were looking for it in 2023, Claire, tell me if I'm misrepresenting what you said in any way. Claire told us that it was challenging to mesh the data that PSB had with the state level data, and that this was in part because of HR staffing issues, and that it would hopefully be rectified for this calendar year. Again, correct me if I'm misrepresenting what you said, Claire.
Nope.
And so that's what we were hoping that you'd be able to share with us, or what was happening on the HR front to gather and maintain these records, so that we would know how many not just educators, staff of color we hired, how many were retained in each reporting period.
And I would just say, when I reported, it was a combination of staffing and some of the processes that were actually in place at that particular time.
Yeah, and one of the things that I had noticed, and some of it's a systems issue, like what data are we gathering and in what form? So DESE, of course, requires that we do some reporting for their purposes on, how many staff members are of color, and they give specific categories. And of course, male, female are another category that we have to report to them. Some of the ways that we have gathered data in the HR side don't align with those categories. I don't know where the list of metrics were derived from. If we're just going to do the DESE categories, then that should be fine. I guess I don't have clarity on exactly what the categories, if it's just of color, then are we defining color as black, brown?
I'm gonna defer to Andy to clarify. Andy wrote this section of the policy.
Yeah, I would need to call up the policy itself, but the policy as a whole was much broader than just staff of color or of particular colors, right? It was meant to address the issue of underrepresentation among our staff relative to the population that we serve. And so it was actually quite broad. And it wasn't just about the reporting was not just about sort of hiring, right? It was also about like PTS, granting of PTS status. So, you know, there's quite a bit in there. And it's not surprising that just meeting DESI requirements doesn't quite do it, right? I think the issue was that we really had no idea what was going on. We were hearing many, many anecdotes. And this was an attempt to just have a firm factual basis for moving forward. But the policy is pretty broad. It covers a lot of things other than just black and brown.
It does, and that's why I wanted to be a little more specific, because I thought it was broader than that, and yet, in some ways, if we're going to gather the data, I just wanted to know it more specifically to what degree you wanted us to gather the information so that we could report it. It's not gathered now, right? We're not necessarily collecting it in a consistent way now. So I just want to make sure that at those places where we're building in the opportunity to gather the information, that we're asking the questions that will give us the ability to report out to you in a way that's meaningful.
So on the example of PTS, Susan, how are we tracking that?
That I haven't looked into PTS specifically. I have, again, on who we're hiring, because I'm building out that system right now. I've not spent as much time on the retention program, because right now my focus is on recruiting, hiring, separation practices, making sure that we have some of these key best practices in place, like exit interviews, which we don't have in place right now. And based on so the exit interviews, we would ask specific questions that would allow us to be able to answer some of your questions. If I have a good sense of the types. I mean, there's always certain standard questions we would ask, but we can include additional types of questions that you might find valuable. So we haven't designed the exit survey yet. We are, focusing right now on hiring the staff and getting some standard operating procedures in place, differentiating our application processes and our onboarding materials so that folks that have struggled in the past to be able to get through our processes will find this to be a more friendly and welcoming process, that we would be able to provide information in different languages, which we have not in the past. So those are all strategies that will help, I think, provide a better experience for staff, especially those that are not native English speakers. So, but again, that's not going to gather the data that you're looking for. Those activities that we're focused on putting in place right now aren't necessarily going to get you the data you're looking for on an annual basis. So, I mean, I'm happy to work with Andy, or if somebody wants to sit down with me and walk through that, so I can make sure that I'm creating a system where we can consistently report out. Right now, again, we have systems, but they're not, we have systems that report information to DESI. We have inconsistent information in Munis. We have other information that's inconsistently gathered in Talent Ed. And there is no through line between them. And that's some of the work that we're doing, is to create a system that is intentional and consistently shares information across our various different data systems. So is there an
So,
interest?
yeah, so Betsy's about to pull up the policy so that you can actually see what it says. And in the meantime, we'll go to Natalia.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, to be honest, this is a real top priority for me. And I imagine for many of the folks, I wasn't on school committee when the policy was passed. It feels like we were having the conversation around the equity audit before, that this could be something that someone could come in and advise on what are best practices, exit interviews, obviously, but also, what metrics would be important in terms of when you're hiring, how many years people stay, do you want to be looking at evaluations? Like, I think that there, I could see a role for, and looking across schools, like our staff of color staying longer at one school versus another. Is there, some of that I could see being really important. I just want to emphasize like how important I think this is. This is one of, and I'm a little disappointed that we don't have information. But again, I wasn't part of the group when this was pulled together. When this policy was written, I guess it's a question to my colleagues. Was there a sense that this was going to be a huge lift, or was it going to be possible? And what does Janae's report from 2022 look like, I guess?
That was not based, my understanding of Janae's report is it came from the DESI information, not from our
Yes, her
I
report
thought-
from
No,
DESI.
that's not correct.
I
No?
thought that she presented 2 sets of data. That's what I'm
That's right.
remembering. She presented
right.
basically because there was no matching, and she and Ty together presented 2 sets of data that didn't match and
That's
knew
right.
it. Okay.
That's right. They hand put together their own set of data because the DESI data was insufficient.
Okay.
So I don't know what their methodology was, other than that they collated it manually.
That's
In the
right. Was it
report,
perfect?
It looks like
Probably
it's
not.
from DESI. It's hard to determine. I'm not indicating that didn't, I think there was some of that took place where they were working together. I know when Janae first presented, she presented her report first, and then Ty came back to the group and reported again. But most of it looks like it came from DESI.
No, there were significant corrections from the DESI report because their foundational assumption was that the DESI categories were insufficient.
And I thought that was because what you're getting in October and or December, they don't update DESI until, from my understanding, until after the first of the year. So I know we have what is in what's reported in October is not necessarily what we're going to actually, they don't update the system. Because when we were doing it this year, the system still had not been updated from 2022
I don't think that
and
they
from
had,
2023.
I don't think that they had updated DESI. They had the DESI data that was available in October. But what I think they did between October and December was work with Ty's office to gather additional data and to present that at the full school committee. That's my recollection of.
But I
Um,
also remember that the data was incorrect. Like there was some presentation of data that just wasn't correct, not even from DESI. Like it wasn't a perfect report, but it
Right.
didn't rely on DESI in any way. And I think it speaks to what Susan is saying about needing to actually, if it means we have to build in other form or other fields or whatever it is in our system to be able to produce the right outcomes.
Yeah, it's totally doable. It's just first starting with what data are we trying to gather? And that's usually what questions are we trying to answer? And so I've read the policy, I've read it several times, but it doesn't lead me to being able to design something specific it's not clear to me in reading this exactly what specific data you would like me to collect.
Are you talking about the demographic data, or are you talking about the hiring, departure, PTS?
Yeah, I can apply that across, right? If I know, like some of the questions that were asked here, it would make a difference, right? So if it's not just what I'm hearing, it's not just what percentage of staff that we're hiring are of color or are well, even male, right? What school or AAPI or whatever those groups you'd like me to track, but also what school and how long did they stay? And right, some of that's longitudinal data that we would have to be tracking over time. So
So I don't think that the policy calls for what Natalia asked for. I think that was more of like a more of something like a 2.0 version. But I think what this looks at are the demographics, and then so we have to have the demographic set pretty tight to then be able to know to apply it to hiring, to departures, and granting of PTS, right?
Yeah.
Because then we can, if we get it on hiring, we know, and we get it on, and we know when that person departs. If we have that data, we're able to look at that longitudinally. We won't have the data at school level, although I don't think that that would necessarily be a heavy burden after we had that first piece, that hiring piece, or with the data that we're collecting upon hire, fairly well set.
yeah, and then you'd look at turnover rate at school, at each school, like what is your typical turnover rate? But those are things, like I said, if we're going to track those, they're not being tracked now. So, you know, that's the information that's helpful as I'm designing it, because your systems weren't designed, or there wasn't a methodology that I can find that was used. If reports were given to you, I don't see, it's not readily accessible to me at this point, what methodologies were used to create reports that were provided to you in the past. So, and some of it, you know, that would be helpful, but on the other hand, since we're redesigning everything, we have the opportunity to do it in whatever way you'd like. So if last year you got reports and those reports satisfied you, I'm happy to look back, and of course I don't have the methodology or the backup material to go along with it, but at least I could go from there and say, this is the information that I'll begin to make sure that we're tracking in a consistent way. And then we can report it, you know, back to you every year, the way that you find valuable.
Mariah?
I just want to be super clear that they did not satisfy at least me last year. And I'm pretty sure the committee felt the same about that. And it wasn't pointing fingers at Janae and at Ty. It was, we all acknowledged the flaws of the system, but definitely last year's report was not what we're looking for.
So
That's
is
right.
one or two people, maybe Andy, since he authored this, sounds like, and one other person want to sit with me, and we can go through and really identify, you know, what those data points would be, and then I
Sure.
can go into our system. And next year we'll be able to give you our first round. It's important right now because we're entering into the hiring season. So I'd love to be able to know what would be ideal for you, so that, you know, we're starting to hit the mark, and we can always add to it, you know, go to a 2.0 version, but let's at least begin with something you would find important and meaningful.
Great, thank you. Stephen, and then Natalia.
Thank you, Susan. I know that you are also building a lot of systems from the ground up right now, so I really appreciate how thoroughly you're looking at this. I want to suggest a slightly different method, though. I think we should strive to remain as compliant with our policies as possible. And to that end, I think we should take a more iterative approach to fulfilling that compliance. So rather than look to comply with the policy in as meaningful a way as possible, I think we should look to comply with the policy as best we can, as soon as we can, and then come up with a more meaningful way to comply with the policy in the future. So I think we should take the data sets that are at our disposal, starting with DESI, and then, if possible, hand correct that to the best of our knowledge, and then submit that as the initial draft in compliance with the policy. and then sit down with the school committee and with the Office of Educational Equity to determine how to more meaningfully fulfill the obligation of this policy in the next submission to the policy, because I wouldn't like to skip the first reporting period entirely.
Natalia and Mariah?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Stephen in the sense that I have very little info, and so any information, even, I mean, if we know that it's inaccurate in some areas, key areas, you could let us know. Because you mentioned that we are currently in the hiring phase. In a version 2.0, I would like to know the applicant pool too, not just the, because it's different if you say we hired no one of X demographic, but there were no applicants versus there were, many applicants. So that's a version 2.0, but I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. And
Yeah, that-
again, yes, I was envisioning I don't know if the equity audit person could help, like there are good practices. So I feel like we're on the fly trying to talk about this, but maybe I'd be happy to be part of a smaller group to think through this if helpful.
Yeah, I'd love that, because right now, as I said, we have this unique opportunity to build in these metrics that you're most interested in. And I just want to make sure because I have a framework right now. I just want to make sure that the data that I'm gathering is in fact what you're hoping for. So like I said, we're completely redesigning forms and rewriting all of our material so that we're collecting information in an iterative way, as opposed to asking for the same information over and over again, and then collecting it in a variety of different ways that isn't exactly the same. And so then you get this like data sets that may appear to have
Right,
conflict.
it's apples and oranges is your concern, which is where we
Exactly.
are. I still think that giving us some snapshot of where we are, even if we have to adjust that data and give that first draft an asterisk, would help the district understand where we are, at least according to the DESI data set, that we could then refine with a better quality sample. I think that would be helpful to us right now, because right now I think we're flying blind.
Can I make
Mariah
one?
and then
Yeah,
Krista. Yeah.
I think I'm going to make 2 comments in support of getting the fields right the first time. One is the Office of Administration and Finance is running extremely lean, particularly in the HR group. So the idea of doing this iterative in multiple years, I think, is asking for a lot from a group that is rebuilding. And the second thing is some of these things are fundamental questions. Like, I'll give one example. DESI counts Hispanic, just calling it Hispanic, not Hispanic, Latinx, or anything else, as one category. So you cannot be, for example, described as being white Hispanic, Asian Hispanic. It mixes race and ethnicity in a way that actually obfuscates data as opposed to really clarifying it. So for our own records, we might want to have ethnicity and race separate. And those kinds of fundamental big picture decisions, to me, are really critical to sort of get right out of the gate before we start asking people to build systems, because they won't be able to go back and recreate that data if we don't make some of these fundamental choices up front. And that will really be in apples and oranges, which is what we're going to end up with now. And it doesn't mean that data can't be used in this more detailed way to then backfill into the DESI data, but we need to make some of these decisions up front on things like that, because just meeting the DESI standard, as we talked about last year, is not sort of sufficient for I think, what we're really looking to achieve. So I'm just going to advocate for not iterative. At least it might be iterative, but it's got to have a real strong start out of the gate and not ask staff to guess what we want. And then iterate from there, because these are very important questions on data that we should have a pretty clear sense of and be able to provide that guidance right away. Not right away, but I'll say through this first round.
Thanks,
I think
Mariah.
what Stephen was saying, a DESI report with the DESI data, like that wouldn't be creating, I think, right? I mean, what you're saying, Mariah, is what new data we create should be not iterative, but creating some sort of report.
Well, we
basically-
have DESI data on the website right now.
Yeah,
But it's
So-
not being collected from the HR systems, and this is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
What we need to do is to design in an elegant way. So if I'm going to collect certain data during the hiring process so that I can then tell you what that is not what you're going to get from the DESI data, right? I mean, and the DESI, this is right now, it doesn't have to be this way. But what we should be able to do is take the data that we're collecting here, and it should be able to transfer over through data files into, let's say, Aspen, in a way that there is connection between this data and what we're reporting. There's a mapping of that. And then you would be able to answer questions, not only in a deeper way for us, because I don't think you're, just my opinion, based on what I've read on your policy and what I'm hearing here tonight, you really aren't looking for DESI data. If you're trying to look at your community profile and say, we would like to have our faculty and staff look more similar to our community, that is not what you're going to get from DESI data, right? So I don't know Brookline, you do. And so if a couple of you want to sit with me and say, this is, and we can put that together, then we'd be able to map that. And now's the time to do that, because mapping and remapping, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do well, but once you have it done, it's done. And it's work that you've needed to do for many, many years that hasn't been done. And I would just encourage us to do the hard work, which is really, and to Stephen's point in the earlier one, what are the research questions we're trying to answer, and then what data do you collect in order to be able to answer those questions? I know you want it now, but sometimes if we can just take one more moment, we can do something far more meaningful with less.
We don't need it again until October, Susan. So I think we'll take you up on the workshop idea, and we'll connect with you offline on
That would be
two of the subcommittee members meeting
Thank
with you. We are running short on time. Mindful it's 6:15. Christy, you've had your hand up. Apologies.
No problem. I had just wanted to just say, when we presented for the first time in December at some point, we provided that comparison for you guys from the DESI data and compared to those gaps that exist with the Munis data, which is at the current point the most accurate data we have, since it's what governs payroll for employees. So we gave you that presentation, so you have that data, you have that snapshot. But I think it's really good that we're having this conversation now, because it seemed like when we gave you that data, there were a lot of questions about those inconsistencies with that DESI data, and it seemed like that was also not the full picture that you guys had wanted as well. So I think it's good that we're having this conversation now, because I think that took a lot of work to find that data, and then it still didn't really answer your questions. So I think this will save us time in the long run and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Great. Thank you. Anything else on this item?
I just want to add, I think, some of the work that we need to do is really having a conversation about how we can support our teachers and staff with being transparent and vulnerable in identification. I think some of the bumps that we bumped into is that people don't have a will to want to identify. And I think that's a conversation that we really need to have. And I think what you're seeing in Munis and some of the other in Aspen, that there's more, we were hoping that we could try to clean that up. I think what's really challenging is that when people on board, there's a question, you can say who you are, but you don't have to answer that question. So I think we have to start to have a different kind of conversation. People need to feel comfortable enough, understanding why we want them to identify. What is the work that we're really trying to do throughout the district? How is this related to some of our strategies in the district to support people around hiring, retention, and a sense of belonging? Because there's something amiss where people don't feel comfortable. identifying who they are. So then when we're trying to collect data and to be able to have a narrative of who we say we are, it's inconsistent. And even as we put in new mechanisms in place, if people don't have the will, we have a comprehensive survey that's going to be going out in combination between OEE and clinical services. It'd be great to see if people, that they'll be able to answer those questions. But it'd be interesting as we look at that data to see how it comes back, if we really get what we would want, a real transparent look at who we are as a district. I'm not sure that we're going to get all of that.
Thank you. Did you have something new, Christy, or is that an old hand?
It was an old hand, but I did want to add one thing. And I just think, to Claire's point, if on the OE staff feedback form there, people did volunteer and disclosed so many identity markers that I don't think they had previously shared. And I think it's that the work of equity is both at once. It's how do we find all the mechanisms to track the hiring, but also how do we create the culture where people feel safe to disclose those identity markers that we're asking them on the feedback form, that we're going to ask them on this climate survey. So I think it's that both and approach, and both are equally important.
Some of that's how you frame your questions. A lot of our materials were not framed in a welcoming way. And so which is why I'm spending the time to rewrite those, you know. Some of them were almost could be viewed offensively from some people. So how you ask a question also can lead to how and if people are willing to answer the questions you're asking. And then not asking so much that people are overwhelmed, you know, so timing can be important and all of that. But I think if we can just start with a couple of you know, want to sit down with me, I'll show you what we have right now. And then we can say, yeah, that works, or no, let's add a couple of more categories. And then I'll be able to take those and we can map it to, you know, Aspen, so that we're pulling data through in a clear and consistent way. But in the end, when we're going to do reports, it doesn't have to take us, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks to cross tie and tick and tie. We should be able to get this information out of our systems. So in a clear and consistent way. So anyways, thank you. I appreciate this has been helpful.
Thank you.
I'll
I think
add
you're
one
actually
more
on for the
thing.
next item too, Susan. Sorry, Claire.
I would just add one more thing. I think collaboration is going to be really important. I think trying to collaborate with the BEU on this, I think if it's also something that's in conjunction and they stand behind us, supporting us in collecting this data, we might also get our membership to really buy in and to want to participate.
So this came up actually as part of negotiations and part of our contract, and is a policy that's in tandem with the actual BEU contract, the equity group that is created under the latest contract. So I believe they're supportive. We can certainly check in with them again, but it came up in conjunction with conversations with them in the last round of contract negotiations. We only have a few more minutes, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly. The menstrual hygiene products bylaw that the town adopted in 2021, the schools have never fully adopted. We supported warrant article 20, which was the update to that policy about a year and a half ago at this point. And it was just approved recently by the Attorney General, which is why we're back discussing it. We had a conversation with Matt Gillis before he left the district about where we were on the building level, and it seemed like it was being done haphazardly in terms of menstrual products being in all bathrooms for students and faculty. I can send you the bylaw if you haven't seen it, Susan, on how that is sort of be implemented. We're going to draft a policy on it, but I just wanted to raise it as something that's going to come back here. We're a little bit ahead of the game. David's gone. We have to actually vote to adopt the bylaw at full school committee. I think that there were folks and lots of us were under the assumption that we had adopted that or that it just applied to us by way of the town voting on it, town meeting voting on it, and that was in fact not the case. So we need to actually vote on it to have the bylaw apply to the schools, and then we'll draft a policy under that. So I'm gonna ask David to get it on the next meeting that we can get that on with agenda items and things like that on the docket already, but just so folks know that it's going to be coming back around. And if you have any thoughts on it, we've reached out to some of the schools and the building leaders and some interest groups on this. Mariah?
I have two questions on this. One is, are we not considering the entire bylaw that was modified, like to include the portions on reproductive and gender health access and equity and beyond the menstrual products bylaw? Because I thought there was quite a bit. I mean, we supported that at not town meeting. We support, yes.
Yeah, we did.
We
Yeah.
endorsed it, or whatever the right word is, before town meeting. And I guess why are we only doing the menstrual products one and not the rest of it at the same time is my first question. And then my second question is, do we actually have to write our own policy, or can we just, this is like a structural question, can we just like say policy like that we incorporate town bylaw yada yada by reference?
So when I raised that with Matt a year ago now, when we were talking about the new Driscoll building, came up in the context of the new Driscoll building and other building projects. When we left it that vague, or sort of that vague was what people were thinking was applying to schools. Some schools decided that having product in the nurse's office satisfied that requirement. Some actually
It needs to be specific.
it needs to be
PSP.
fairly specific
Okay.
PSP.
Okay. And then, but just on the first half of the question, is there a reason we're not incorporating the rest of I know we just voted the wellness policy, but given that a lot of what's in there actually sort of applies to the wellness policy, although maybe it should be its own policy, is David going to be drafting something for both?
I will ask him about the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recall this early in my time here. I might not even be have started yet, but I do recall Matt mentioning confusion around if the policy or the intention was in all of the kindergarten bathrooms or first grade bathrooms, if the expectation is that you would have menstrual products in those bathrooms as well, if it said all. I remember him mentioning that to me. I guess I would argue that you probably do want to have a policy and not just leave it to all bathrooms, unless that's your intention.
Well, I think also the policy as it's written by the town has some differentiation about bathrooms that serve female identifying bodies or whatever it is. But I think at the high school, they are putting menstrual products in all of the bathrooms because of the different gender identities that may or may not be disclosing and not wanting to have people use the bathroom they don't feel comfortable with. So I think you're right. It does make sense to be more specific given the situations that are schools related.
Anybody have any new business, other business? All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.